I'm Susan Stenger. I'm a performer and a composer, and I'm very pleased to have had the opportunity to make a sound installation this year at the AV Festival that's taking place in the domed entranceway to the Civic Centre. And that piece is called Full Circle. It's part of a series that I've done called The Structures of Everyday Life. But this is the most kind of comprehensive piece in that series, and was absolutely perfect site for it, and I'm very excited that I had the chance to do it. It's a dome that causes this really interesting kind of resonance and reverberation, but I just happened to notice the quality of it actually at the AV Festival in 2010, when Charlemagne Palestine was doing a performance here in the Carillon. And I thought then that it would be a great place to do a performance. And when looking for a site for Full Circle, it kind of leapt out at me as the perfect space. Because I'm using the piece is all about cycles and various kind of natural cycles and structural cycles in music kind of superimposed. And the space there, this circular, and there are pillars all around that kind of reflect the shape of the speaker stands that I'm using for the installation. And then there's a kind of curved waterway full of ducks, and then a curved grassy area full of daffodils and bunnies, and then the curved road as well, all of which is part of the piece in that sense. The sounds of the buses going by and people walking through on their way to lunch, it's all part of it. A lot of my compositions have to do with perception of time. And I'm interested in how time is perceived by the listener, and also how time is measured in various ways. And my work often explores structural, you could almost call them cliches or gestures in conventional musical structures like song form, pop song form, and also kind of conventional Western harmony. I try to take those things out of context and sort of investigate them and recontextualize them. But I'm also interested in the natural cycles. And the theme of this festival seemed a perfect opportunity to kind of put those two things together, and that's what Full Circle does. So it reflects kind of waxing and waning motion of lunar cycle and yearly cycles, and part of the piece was a drawing that I did that is handed out at the site, so people can look at that and ponder all the different arcane things that I've included on there. But it's about kind of unity of opposites and time kind of rushing by, but also feeling the sense of stasis. And I think it's a kind of metaphor for that, in the sense that it's in a space where it's like a tiny oasis of sound and of peace and calm, with the traffic rushing by and people rushing through on their way back to work from lunch or whatever. But you can kind of sense that kind of almost tipping point where you're kind of in one way serene, and another way kind of in the midst of this rushing world. And I hope to kind of capture that sense of time where you feel in the midst of a chord, you feel like it's so slow moving that you can't even really feel any forward movement. But there are also aspects to it that make you feel a sense of momentum and of wanting to resolve to the next chord. There's this kind of urged or feeling of urgency to resolve and move on. And then it moves around a cycle of chords, constantly repeating that pattern, building up a kind of tension and then release and resolution and tension and resolution. So it's a kind of repetition, but at the same time it is moving forward, and of course time is moving forward. And it's also quite nice that I was able to have it be here for the entire month of March. So by the end of March, the light will be totally different at the ending time of 6 o'clock. It runs from 12 to 6. And every day a few more daffodils will be out. It'll be lighter at 6 o'clock. And so it's really interacting with the actual time around it, even at the same time as it's representing yearly cycle and 12-yearly cycle and the lunar cycle. This is a graphic representation of the piece, and it includes this cycle, which is called the Circle of Fourths, which is a kind of way of organizing the different pitches or the chords that make up the basic building blocks of Western music and harmony. And by putting them in this particular order, where every note is a fourth apart from the one before, you end up back where you started. If you went this way, it would move in fifths, so C, D, E, F, G, G, A, B, C, D. But this way is fourths. And this is the progression, the chord progression of the piece. This chord builds up from just one note to a dense cluster of pitches, and then eventually resolves into this chord. And then the same process happens over and over again, but with different pitches. So you're both repeating a process and a structure, but also moving forward. And it's, it all has to do with this idea of the sort of unity of opposites. And when you're standing in the midst of the piece, because you can move amongst the speakers and kind of be right inside it. It's like you're standing in the middle of the chord, and almost time has stopped. Almost you feel like you've entered into this other dimension. But at the same time, if you stay long enough, you hear the pitches changing, and you hear something happening harmonically, that something is moving forward and resolving, but in a very slow way. And I like playing with time that way, because it makes you really listen. When you do it in the conventional way, it's so familiar that you hardly pay any attention to it. But by slowing it down, it's almost like the time equivalent of looking at something under a microscope. You see the detail, and you hear it in a completely new way. It's a general waxing and waning cycle. So the moon is a new moon and a quarter moon and a half moon until you get to the full moon, which is kind of the equivalent of the most dense section, and then it wanes, and then the whole thing starts again. So every half hour there's a waxing and waning, but when you think of the entire cycle of 6 hours, there's also a waxing and waning, because it's building up to a kind of dense timbre, because it's changing the instrumental quality, the sound of the instrument. It starts with the flute, which is a really pure sound, and builds up to a really dense brass sound, and eventually changes to voices and goes back to flute. So that's a kind of cycle that maybe is kind of the equivalent of spring, summer, autumn, winter. And this is also in the Chinese zodiac. There's the same kind of pattern, and in the I Ching there's a pattern called the Bagua sequence, which is also a waxing and waning pattern that's related in Chinese alchemy to the yearly cycle as well. So I found a way to put it all in one big chart, and it is part of the piece. It's, in a sense, it's a score. It's a kind of map to the piece, I guess I would call it.